Thanks very much, Joe. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I think we are in kind of tumultuous times. We have been that way for at least 10 years. A lot of those tumultuous times are in the Middle East, and and I want to describe some of that. And so, as our new president or whoever wins the November election and whoever is sworn in January, will see an inbox full of these problems. You know, when I think of what this president will look at in January, I'm always reminded of the Polish prime minister in the 1950s, a guy named Władysław Gomułka, who was known for long speeches and not very successful metaphors. And he stood up in front of a growingly impatient crowd in Krakow and said to the crowd, "Comrades, just a few years ago, our country was on the edge of a very deep abyss. And today, I'm here to tell you we are taking an important step forward." I think we need to be careful about how we proceed ahead. But I thought I would discuss some of the main issues, mainly or in the context of tonight, maybe talk about China and the Middle East and how I see those issues going forward. I think probably people haven't seen a lot about China in the last week, partly because we've seen all too much about the Middle East in the last 2 weeks. But China is going through truly tumultuous times. It is an old Chinese curse that may you live in interesting times, and certainly that is happening today. China has their own transition. It's not an election. It's even messier than our form than one of our elections. They do it every 10 years. They kind of signal to the world that it's going to be that who is going to emerge as the next president. Everybody knows that Xi Jinping is going to be the next the replacement for Hu Jintao. But lo and behold, he just disappeared for 2 weeks, much to everybody's confusion, whether he had some kind of physical ailment or some kind of political problem, not clear. But he was gone for 2 years and 2 weeks, seemed like 2 years, and the Chinese government didn't even feel necessary to say, he's got a cold, he's got a backache, he's got something. So it kind of was left for the rumor mill. And China is, since they don't have democratic institutions, what they do have is something that we all have, which is the internet. And in China, you have some 500 million internet users. Now that's a lot of people blogging or doing microblogs, as they're called there, and that's a lot of people sending a lot of information around to each other. And Americans might think that all they talk about in China is a desire for human rights or something. And that's true. That is certainly part of the main discussion points on the Chinese internet. But there's some other things going on. And those other things we're beginning to get a taste of in the last year or so. One thing that happens on the internet is there's a lot of sharp criticism of the government, not for being a government that represses people, but rather for a government that hasn't done enough to, for example, safeguard Chinese raw material acquisition. So when you look at the utter mess the Chinese have gotten themselves into with their southern neighbors in Southeast Asia, with Vietnam, with Indonesia, with Malaysia, with the Philippines, and it's all over this issue of maritime claims. The Chinese have put out a claim which is really not something new, but it's something that is more strongly adhered to than ever before, and that's called the 9 Dashes, where they basically claim all of the South China Sea and try to turn it into a southern Chinese lake. Well, this is something the Chinese government is getting pushed on relentlessly in the internet. What's the matter? Why are you allowing the Vietnamese to push you around? They've been doing this to us for 1,000 years. Why don't we, strike back at them? This type of thing, the Chinese government is taking a lot of grief for. Now, you would say, well, the Chinese government ought to be able to snuff that out. Well, that's not how things are developing in China. Yes, if you get up and you talk about, Tibet should be independent, they rush to the scene of the crime and, do something about that. If you try to, say something nice about Taiwan on the internet, they'll kind of come after you there, or Falun Gong, which is this sort of cultish thing that the Chinese government is very, very concerned about. But when they talk about more raw material acquisition, the government doesn't necessarily leap to doing something about it. They rather leap to the task of saying, no, we're being as tough as nails on the Vietnamese. So the good news is it's a kind of democratic thing where people are speaking, the government is responding. The bad news is that it tends to be sometimes these thoughts that are coming out of this internet are not very helpful, and frankly are very highly inflamed and nationalistic. And so when you look at how they have managed this recent situation with the Japanese, as the Japanese have moved. Probably not as well as they could have managed. The Senkaku Islands; these are islands closer to the East China Sea, and the Japanese took some steps there. Lo and behold, the Chinese public got furious with the Japanese, and so we're seeing now what the Chinese government has done in the past is they let them demonstrate for a couple of days, blow off steam, and then say, okay, guys, time to go home. They're having trouble doing that right now. And so this, in turn, is inflaming nationalism in Japan, because they have had weak governments there ever since Prime Minister Koizumi left office back in 2006, if I have that right. And so the Japanese public is anxious to see their government, sort of stand up for their rights. And so we're getting this sort of nationalism in China and Japan kind of feeding on each other, and kind of increasing tensions. Into this whole thing comes U.S. policy, which was to say, and this happened about a year ago when President Obama gave a speech in Honolulu. And he said, look, we need to refocus on where our country's interests are in the future, and those countries are in East Asia. We need to have a bigger presence in East Asia and pay more attention there. The subtext was, we're getting out of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're going to focus now on where our long-term job prospects are and economic prospects are. The trouble was that somewhere between the time that President Obama announced this kind of sensible rebalancing, it became known as the pivot, and it became known as an effort to kind of disengage from the Middle East, not a good thing to signal, and to re-engage in East Asia, and in so doing, to do it for the purpose of confronting China. So this became kind of a signal to the Vietnamese, to the Filipinos, to say, Americans, great, you're back, help defend us. And so rather than say, look, Filipinos, Vietnamese, we know you got problems with the Chinese, we have problems with the Chinese too. You got to handle this calmly. We don't need these inflammatory statements about the Chinese. We need to work through diplomatic channels. We need to kind of keep this calm. That wasn't how the American press or frankly, even some of the people involved with it have sort of laid this out. It's been more of, we're back in East Asia in order to confront a more aggressive China. Well, confronting an aggressive China is, we do have a serious competition with China. Make no mistake about it, this is a formidable country. It's a country with ambition. It's a country that I think can challenge our interests. It's also a relationship that is, to use a phrase from a few years ago, too big to fail. We cannot allow our relationship with China to become one characterized by sort of unrelenting hostility between the two countries. We've got to do a little better job of keeping open our lines of communication and working to diffuse crises rather than allowing our press or their internet to kind of inflame this thing. Because a lot in the internet in China is talking about the U.S. is trying to encircle China. They are befriending these countries in Southeast Asia for the purpose of encircling us, just as the Soviet Union did 30 years ago. Why is our government not fighting this harder? So we need to stay engaged there. And by the way, if anyone needs a pep talk on why we need to be a little careful about dealing with China, I suggest you go out and see the Great Wall of China someday and ask yourself the question, if someone builds, do we really want to get into a fight with the people who build a thing like this? In short, we really need to figure out a longer term, more stable approach. We need to take some of the oscillations out of this. I think we need to do a little better job of building relationships with Chinese leadership. Doesn't mean we're going to see eye to eye with them, and certainly the Chinese have been particularly difficult in the last 2 years. I do not for a minute blame the U.S. for the fact that China has kind of recklessly and clumsily pushed these South China Sea claims. I don't blame the U.S. for how the Chinese have been handling the Japanese lately. And my favorite, the U.S. for the way the Chinese have simply sat on their hands and done very little to deal with North Korea. North Korea, as a president surveys the scene in January, will unfortunately still be there. I mean, these are people that only a mother can love. I tell you, they have no redeeming features. I've been there several times. I mean, you can find people who think that they have some inner warmth to them. They don't. It is really one of the most horrendous regimes we have seen to come out of the horrendous middle of the 20th century. They are clearly bent on building nuclear weapons. They did not start building nuclear weapons because somehow Bill Clinton hurt their feelings or George W. Bush hurt their feelings. They've been at it for some 30 years. This has nothing to do with hurting their feelings. This has nothing to do with making them feel that we don't love them, or that we're somehow out to get them. And I know that because I spent 4 years negotiating with them. We put on the table, along with the Chinese, the Russians, the Japanese, and South Koreans, we put on the table, I think, a very fair deal to the North Koreans, which is when you get rid of your nuclear weapons, a lot of things are going to be possible. If you want a peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula, we're prepared to reach a peace treaty with you. If you want diplomatic relations with us, many countries have diplomatic relations with the North Koreans, we don't. And if you want diplomatic relations with us, we're prepared to do that, but we are not prepared to do it with a nuclear North Korea. And so finally, we had a situation in the summer of 2008. We had made some progress. We got them to blow up the cooling tower of their plutonium reactor. We got a situation where they were making no more bomb-making material. However, we knew that they had what's called a uranium enrichment program. We didn't know how active it was. And so we told them that as we got to the verification stage of our agreement, we said we're going to have to keep open our right to visit unknown sites. That is, we were not going to agree with the North Koreans that the sites that they listed in their declaration were the totality of their nuclear program, and therefore we should never look at something else. Instead, we said we need to keep that door open because we know you have additional sites, and they refused to go along with that, and we pulled out of the talks. At that point, Kim Jong-il had become Kim Jong-very ill in the summer of 2008, and he died a year ago, and now Kim Jong-un has taken his place, his son. There's a lot of talk in the press that Kim Jong-un is some kind of reformer. I think it's very important that we pay a lot of attention to it, to understand what Kim Jong-un is up to and whether his kind of regent is Chung Song-tek, who's the brother-in-law of Kim Jong-il. I almost need a scorecard for this, but it's worth, no doubt, keeping tabs on it, but I think you have to kind of work on facts here, and we don't have too many facts to support the contention that he's a reformer. So how do we get something done about North Korea's nuclear aspirations? And the answer is we've got to go back to that previous place, China. And we have to make it clear to the Chinese that this is an issue of a top echelon issue for us. We are very, we have a lot of options for dealing with it. We don't have the option of forgetting about it or walking away. We have to stay with it. And so I think to get the Chinese to really work with us, they did work with us a few years ago on this agreement we reached, but they haven't been able to work with us to finish the job. We need to make it clear to them that China's interests will not suffer if North Korea gives up their nuclear weapons, or even if North Korea somehow collapses, however that would be. I think there are many people in China, increasingly so, unfortunately, who look at the relationship with the U.S. as kind of a zero-sum game. So they begin to see if North Korea goes down, this is somehow a victory for the U.S. and a defeat for China. And so we need to reacquaint the Chinese with the notion that if we work together with China, we can, frankly, move mountains and get the North Koreans to give up their nuclear weapons. I think the Chinese have some clout here. The Chinese always say we never use sanctions. Well, we've seen a couple of cases lately where indeed they have sanctioned countries like the Philippines over the South China Sea. They sanctioned, they stopped selling rare earth minerals to Japan a couple of years ago over this island dispute. So I think we can convince the Chinese. But the way we need to do that is to kind of sharpen our focus. And this is to say, it's one thing to talk about human rights abuses or human rights record in a very sharp context. That is what we often did, what I did with Secretary Rice, indeed what I did with Secretary Clinton, because I accompanied her on her trip in '09, is you shoo everyone out of the room and you talk to one person and talk about the human rights record and you give them a list and say, we want these people who are in prison for various trumped up charges on income tax or whatever, we want them out. And you work that in a very quiet way, and when Secretary Rice or Secretary Clinton would emerge from the meeting, she wouldn't even talk about it. Neither of them would talk about this. But we sprung people that way. And I think that's the kind of way to deal with China. If you try to do it publicly, if you try to yell at them from Washington, you're not going to get anywhere. In fact, you're probably going to get more people put in prison. So we have to kind of sharpen the focus and, dare I say it, come up with kind of a list of things that are more important than other things. I would put regional security up there, and frankly, I'd start with nuclear weapons. I mean, I think that's a fairly important issue, and I think we need to convince the Chinese it is number one on our list. And if they want to buy some more soybeans from us, we'd love that. We insist on that. That's great. But the top priority is we got to deal with these nuclear weapons. And so I think we need to kind of focus this and not think we can somehow remake China in our image. We're not going to be able to do that. This is a country that is some 1.3 billion people. I remember President Bush came to the State Department and asked whether he should go to asked a group of us whether he should go to the opening ceremonies of the Olympics in light of the Tibet situation. And went to some of our people in charge of human rights. They said, well, you might consider that, at least threaten it. It might be. And it got around to me, the East Asia guy, and I said, Mr. President, there are 1.3 billion reasons why you shouldn't boycott the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. I don't think frankly, I don't think our relationship would have ever recovered from that kind of finger in the eye. So I think we've got to be careful about how we deal with China. We need to be clear about our values, but even clearer about our interests. And I think we need help on this nuclear issue. We need China to stop bullying its neighbors. And frankly, we need China to understand that it is unsustainable, to use that favorite word many people have, for China to be operating these kinds of surpluses with us. We need some kind of two-way trade going. So again, I think this is doable, but I think we need to understand that when we deal with the Chinese, it's not just about a transaction. It's not just going there and announcing you've done this or that. It's about building relationships. And so the time for an administration in January, and if Obama's reelected, you'll see a lot of new faces in his administration. If Romney is elected, you'll see a lot of new faces as well. Maybe actually some old faces, come to think of it. But in any event, we need to get going early with the Chinese. Kind of shifting a little to the Middle East, because I truly believe that it is not realistic for anyone to say we can't deal with Middle East peace. We have to deal with Middle East peace. We have to have an envoy out there. We have to be working with the Israelis on this, even if their prime minister contains his enthusiasm for some of these ideas. I think we do need to be out there and working the issues. It has been truly the elusive peace. It's been the peace that has, the search for it has gone through the lifetimes of many generations of diplomats. And I think we need to kind of get back in that game and work that as hard as we can. I say that because right now the Middle East is being transformed. And those people who were inspired by the Arab Spring, or Arab Thing as I call it, the Arab Thing is a very complex set of issues going on. You really have to disaggregate. You have to look at individual countries. You have to understand what is really going on. Is it a call for freedom? Is it really all coming from people with Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts? Or is it maybe something else? And I think to some extent we have not understood what the developments in that part of the world, and not understood the linkage really to Middle East peace, to having a presence there, having an effort, an ongoing effort to try to deal with the Israel-Palestine question. Of course, one thing we've learned through the Arab Thing is that this is not all about Israel. This is about Arabs on Arabs, and we have, I think, Americans have really begun to get a dose of that, but no more so than in the case of Syria. You know, people, every day we see these stories about, that Bashar Assad's forces have killed X number of people, etc. And you think to yourself, how can anyone still be fighting for Bashar Assad? He's clearly on the wrong side of history. He is clearly going down sooner or later. Why do these people why do they keep fighting like this? And the answer, often in a question posed like that, is the answer is they're not fighting for Bashar Assad. They're fighting for a certain system of governance in Syria. By the way, it has nothing to do with democracy or dictatorship. It has to do with who's going to run that country. And the Alawites, who are Muslim, Shia, sort of Shia-leaning, I wouldn't call them Shia, but Shia-leaning sect comprised probably less than 15% of the population. They are the ones, they essentially run the country along with other minorities, including Druze, including Christians, including Kurds, and also including kind of secular Sunnis. And the more sectarian Sunnis are very much feeling left out, feeling on the outs. And it's the sectarian Sunnis who are often described as Muslim Brotherhood, or similar to the radicals in Egypt known as the Salafists. These very sectarian Sunnis are the ones who want to overturn Syria and turn it into a majority Sunni-run country. In many of the Arab countries who have never liked Bashar Assad, what's to like, have looked at whether Syria can be finally flipped back into being a Sunni country. Now I ask you, is this a project that the U.S. really wants to get in the middle of? I don't think so. But I would argue that we do need to work harder with countries with stakeholding positions, and that includes Turkey, and we're doing things with the Turks, but it also includes some of these Arab countries, to come up with a kind of political solution that would make sense and be workable. You know, a lot of people have talked about the carnage, the death of these civilians in Syria as an example of, it's just like Bosnia. You know, we're seeing it all again, just like Bosnia, and we're not jumping in. There's a big difference between Bosnia and Syria today. And what we had in Bosnia, we had something called the Contact Group Plan. And the Contact Group Plan was something we worked out with the Russians, we worked it out with the Europeans. We got buy-in from even Milosevic. And, you know, Milosevic was not a very nice guy, kind of like Bashir Assad. And, you know, with a lot of blood on his hands, but we did manage to talk to him, and we did manage to get him to sign on to political arrangements. Because at the end of the day, this won't be done, Syria won't be solved by warfare, it'll be done by diplomacy. And so I think a new president or a new term for a president is going to involve understanding that Syria is a place that is going to take up a lot of time, and that we need to get on it early, and we need to get on it before this whole Sunni-Shia divide, which is what we're seeing, or Sunnis on the one side and Shia and other allies on the other side in Syria, metastasizes and reaches the rest of the Middle East. We are already seeing blowback from Syria affecting Lebanon, and Lebanon doesn't take much to go back into conflict. And that gets me to Iraq, because we're also seeing the Syrian situation affecting the situation in Iraq. Now, people are often, they look at Iraq, they hear about a bomb blast kills 20, and they say, oh, sectarian warfare in Iraq must be because the U.S. left. Well, there is sectarian warfare in Iraq, but I would encourage people to understand what these bomb blasts are. These are Al-Qaeda type Sunnis, and you have to remember, Al-Qaeda is an extreme version of something called Wahhabism, which is in itself an extreme version of Main Street Sunniism. And so Al-Qaeda are attacking not us, we're not there. They're attacking the Shia. And if you're an extremist Sunni, you regard the Shia as non-believers, as apostates. And if you're a hardline extremist Muslim Brotherhood type Sunni, and you look at Iraq and you say that is the only country in the Middle East, the only country in the entire Muslim world run by the Shia, except for Iran. They're certainly the only Arab country run by the Shia. And you're saying now the Americans are out, now's our time to get back in there and fix this before the East Province in Saudi Arabia, also very Shia, not an independent state, but very Shia, which, by the way, happens to be the main sort of oil source in Saudi Arabia. So you're worried that, if Shiism is allowed to consolidate as the governance of Iraq, or the leading governance, I mean, there are Sunnis in it, it's kind of power sharing, but the person in charge is a Shia. This will cause a situation where, other Shia pockets in various parts of the Middle East will begin to say, well, why can't we have our own state, such as the East Province? So a lot of what we're seeing, has nothing to do with us. It has to do with what's going on in the Arab world, and we have to be respectful that just because we think the sun goes up and down every day on us, we are not the only country that counts here. So we've got to work on this. What is happening in Iraq is the Iranians clearly worried about a restitution of Sunni rule. Remember, Saddam Hussein was the last Sunni ruler there. They don't want a restoration of Sunni rule, so they are supporting these Shia militia groups. Now, these Shia militia groups are people who this Shia leader Maliki, who is he's no fun. I can personally attest to. I always say about Maliki, if he ever had charisma, it cleared up a long time ago, because you just can't deal with that guy many times. But he's no Iranian stooge. He's an Iraqi Shia who doesn't want to see Iranians any more than he wants to see Saudis. He's an Iraqi nationalist, frankly. And so he went out after the Mehdi army, one of these Shia militia groups, and managed to get rid of them, get them out of Basra. And so he has had problems with these extreme Shia groups ever since he did that. He's had problems essentially with the Iranians. So you see the Iranians in there trying to see if they can resupply some of these Shia groups, Shia militia groups. You see the Sunnis in there supporting various Sunni groups and supporting, trying to topple the Iraqi government. These are not problems calling for U.S. soldiers. These are problems calling for U.S. diplomats, and we've got to be engaged there. Iraq, I think, is a country that's probably going to make it. Because, frankly, of a lot of effort. I mean, we had to see what our troops did, to see what our Marines did in Anbar. I mean, you're a 24-year-old Marine, and you're out there talking to a sheikh. You have nothing in your training package to tell you how to manage this sheikh. And so you say, you just, because you have adapted to the battlefield as soldiers have done since the dawn of history, and you say to the sheikh, "Sheikh, what do you want from me? How can I help?" And sometimes the sheikh says you can help by leaving, but more and more often these sheikhs in places in these remote parts of Iraq are saying, I really need to build a road for my people. They've never been able to get across a bridge. They've never been able to get over this river. And that young Marine says, let me work on that. And lo and behold, he got some money and he did it. So money can be a weapon of war, and if used judiciously, if used carefully, if used toward a specific purpose, you can get some things done. We did a lot of things like that. But now is not the time to send soldiers. Now the time is the time to send diplomats. And by the way, we can build roads too. We often ask for environmental impact statements or something, but we can get these things. We can get these things done. And so we need to be very active in these places. And in order to do that, we need embassies that have some doors and not just drawbridges. We need diplomats who, like Chris Stevens, are willing to go out there and talk to people and deal with people directly. We need to find ways to get, if not over those walls in an embassy, but maybe through them. With social media, I think, plays a role in this. And I think if Americans understand that we're still kind of it in the world, and for those who think that somehow the U.S. is in decline and China is in the ascendancy, as I described a few minutes ago, and I'll soon stop after this, but the Chinese would so gladly exchange their problems for our problems. I don't know if they'd exchange our politicians for their politicians, but they would certainly take a straight-up deal on the problems. In short, China's not replacing the U.S., not in our lifetime, not in our children's lifetime. India is not replacing the U.S. Europe is not replacing the U.S. The U.S., we're kind of it out there. And so we have these responsibilities. We never asked for them. We never wanted them. We have no interest in territory. But we do have the capacity, if we kind of remember our roots as a practical people who every time we've ever seen a problem, we've also seen a solution. Sometimes it goes a little far because not every problem does have a solution, but at least we're looking for a solution. I think we're pretty good at this kind of stuff. And so often what you're trying to do when you're sitting there, I remember cutting a deal with this guerrilla leader in Kosovo, and he wouldn't go along with it. And he said it had to do with the Serbs, and he said, how can I trust the Serbs? I said, not your problem. That's my problem. Your problem is, do you trust me? And if you don't trust me, I want you to understand that means you don't trust the American government. And if you don't trust the American government, you don't trust the American people. And Mr. Krasniqi, if you don't trust the American people, you are in big trouble. He did the deal. So thank you. Thank you very much.
I lived in Libya for 4 years, from 57 to 60, working as a geologist in the Sahara. And obviously oil was a big deal. But what do you think about the displacement of Gaddafi, the way it was done? Because it seems like perhaps whatever stability they had is no longer in existence.
Yeah. I have a hard time with the idea that Gaddafi was really stable, either as a government or mentally. I think there was a lot of signs, actually, that he was really deteriorating badly. I think the country was certainly deteriorating. And I think it was pretty clear that most people wanted him gone. The problem was that he was prepared to kill a lot of civilians. And sometimes these guys say something, and saying something doesn't really mean something. But then when you combine it with capability and intent, you've got a problem. And so I understood why the NATO countries met in Paris. Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, was there as well. I can understand why they met together and decided they needed to launch air operations. The problem, I think, happened where the air operations, which were designed to protect civilians, began a kind of mission creep and began to hit fielded forces, and it began essentially to be used as sort of the air arm of Libyan militia. I think the feeling was, once in, we had to eliminate Gaddafi. But I think in going in that way, we kind of empowered some of these militia groups and probably created some of the situation that we saw play out in Benghazi. I think there was an effort to try to work on governance. I know that work on the issue of getting the opposition groups to unite. Same sort of things that have been going on in Syria, not very successfully. But I think ultimately Gaddafi fell and the opposition was not ready to take over, and it's still not ready. Now Benghazi, my understanding, because I think this has to be done very carefully through some investigations, is that the consulate, when they would have security problems, they were supposed to call some local militia, which was tied to some tribal leader there. Well, that's a kind of dangerous situation. I mean, my embassy got overrun in Macedonia. It was the first day of bombing by the Serbs. These demonstrators would bust in. They went and attacked the main hotel. The Macedonian police deployed to prevent them from going after the main hotel where all the foreigners were. And in effect, the Macedonian police basically turned them around and drove them pushed them toward the American embassy. And before you know it, I was down in the basement with 42 employees, calling Washington for help. I didn't like being in that situation because I kept saying to myself, what about this did you fail to anticipate? It kind of runs through your mind a lot. I think ultimately we got through it okay. We were lucky. But when you look at what's going on in Benghazi, where Plan A is to call a militia and Plan B is to call again, I want to see what the investigation shows on how this was done, because it's these situations. I remember that day in Skopje. There were just a few people throwing, doing graffiti on our outside wall and throwing some eggs. Well, those eggs turned to rocks, and before you know it, we went from about 50 demonstrators to thousands who were, and the police couldn't even get on the other side of it to help us. So it was kind of unpredicted in that sense. But all during the day, I was getting reports. That's why we were all buttoned down, and they never did breach our building. But those things have to be looked at very carefully. But I just hope they don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and shut down the entire U.S. diplomacy in the region, because now is the time when we need people out there.
Next question's on this side.
Thank you very much for a tremendous overview. Absent from your discussion, absent from the front page, absent from most discussions, is the mention of Russia. What is going on with Russia?
Well, about like that microphone. It's a lot of screeching sounds up there in Russia. I think Russia is kind of settling into kind of an authoritarian mode. There's money there. There's a rising upper class, but there's also a rising middle class. There are a lot of people very dissatisfied with the situation there. I think Putin is getting worse. He was never good, by the way. But he's definitely gotten worse. And I think we're looking to a kind of a long-term problem there, which gets postponed because the economy is kind of doing okay, and they're not willing to go out in the streets and do something about it. I like to think in the long run, as they grow this middle class, as they're more open to the world than ever before, that eventually there will be change, and that it will come in the form of, it will come from the West rather than from the East. That is, it will not revert to some one-man authoritarian rule. But it's pretty close to that right now. I think it's probably a bigger problem, maybe not as important to us, but a harder problem to solve than China. I think China is probably, they'll never look like us, but in terms of our democracy, and because they don't want to, but I think they will be more democratic in the fullness of time. I think Russia is going to take a longer time to get there, and in the meantime, we have to figure out ways to work with them. And I do worry about, to me, when I look at Syria, I see broader interests. I see a Russian relationship that's engaged, and I'd like to see us pay a little more attention to that Russian relationship rather than just name calling. I think that's the worst diplomacy. People always ask me to say terrible things about the North Koreans, and I'd always say, wait till I'm out of diplomatic service. I've got plenty of them to say. But when you're in the middle of it, when you have to go talk to people the next day, you don't say nasty things about them. And I think some of our people need to be a little careful about how they behave with the Russians.
We're going to continue to ask questions without the microphone, so we'll just ask. Yeah, that's right. All in favor, say aye.
I noticed you didn't mention Israel, Iran, and the nuclear.
Oh, yeah. Whoa. It was written right here, and but the trouble was I snuck a peek at my watch, and I was just worried I was going way over. First of all, I talked about the North Korean nuclear issue. But that goes in spades for the Iranian nuclear issue. We cannot walk away from that one either. I'm concerned about it because I think the Iranians have not really shown any serious counter proposals at the bargaining table. I completely support us sitting down in the so-called P5+1, the UN Security Council members plus Germany. I think it's the right way to go. I don't think we've put really much on the table at all. So I'm not sure the negotiations have really gotten going very seriously. They seem to meet with a pre-set time. So they're sort of three and out. They arrive Tuesday, they talk on Wednesday, and they're gone on Thursday. One thing I learned from Richard Holbrooke when we went to Dayton is I said, how long are we going to be here? And he said, beats the heck out of me. And I said, well, how many shirts? He said, take all you got, because we could be here. And sure enough, we were there for 21 days and nights. And many people had thought, it had all bogged down, but we weren't going to leave until we had a deal. Same in the summer of '05, and I was kind of channeling Holbrooke on this. I told my Chinese hosts, I said the six-party process is looking pretty threadbare. They've had 3 sessions, they've gotten nowhere, and I said we've got to stay here until we get a deal. We did all summer. It took us all summer. We got a deal, which resulted in ending their plutonium program. I think we have to kind of do a little of that with the Iranians. Now, the big question is, will it work? And are the Iranians simply stalling for time? I think as you read things in the newspaper, there are other efforts going on to try to mess up the Iranian program, such as these computer viruses. Somebody's been knocking off some of their scientists. I'm not sure I agree with that, but it's getting done. I think this type of trying to clandestinely attack their facilities is something that ought to continue. But if they can get traction on the on the political talks. I mean, I think that's obviously the best solution. And if we don't, I think we have to sit down with some allies and partners and go through those awful, desultory moments at the UN to take a so-called Chapter 7, all necessary means resolution to go after their nuclear facilities. My problem with it is it doesn't solve the problem. It puts them back a couple of years. It unifies Iran behind this miserable regime that they have, and it risks wider conflict in the Middle East. So I think war is, as the bumper sticker says, not the answer, but I think it does have to be on the table, because if Iran is allowed to get away with this, you're going to have a Saudi bomb, and when you get a Saudi bomb, you're going to get other bombs in the Middle East, and when you get bombs in the Middle East, they tend to get used. So I really think we've got to stay with this until we find a solution. I will say I've never been a fan of sanctions. I mean, North Korea is the most sanctioned country in the world, but these are people who are happy to eat dirt or have their people eat dirt, and I don't think they care about the sanctions. I think Iran does care about the sanctions, so I think there may be something that can be done through sanctions, provided everyone's on board. And they've worked out these kind of carve-outs for some countries, and to try to keep everyone on board with the resolutions. I think that's kind of the right approach. And it's amazing I didn't talk about Iran earlier, because I think it is probably the number one issue that the president's going to have in January. As for Israel solving our problem for us, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it makes even less sense for the Israelis to go and bomb them with bombs tucked under F-15s. I don't think that's going to solve the problem at all. And frankly, I worry a little about what the Israeli Prime Minister says on a daily basis, because he may be thinking he's goading us into something, but he may end up squeezing himself into having to do something that he knows is not a good idea. If this problem needs to be solved by military means, it's not for us to turn it over to Israel and have them solve it, because they can't.
I have a question in the center here.
Mr. Ambassador, assuming that we continue with this negotiation and down this path of negotiation, where's the end game?
With the Iranians?
With the Iranians, yeah. It seems to me
I think the end game would be you allow them a civilian nuclear program. You got to even wonder about that, because this country's awash in oil. Why do they even need a nuclear program? But I think the end of the game in negotiation terms is you allow them a program, but don't allow them the full nuclear fuel cycle. That is, they have to take it out of the country, and you have control of the nuclear fuel cycle such that it cannot be diverted. So I think it's going to be ugly. It's not going to look perfect, but I think it'll be that type of solution where their right to under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, their right to a nuclear, civil nuclear program will somehow be supported, and that they will build some reactors, but without having the full cycle such that they can produce more of the stuff and use it for bombs.
Do you think they'll accept that?
Oh, you mean if? No, I'm talking about if there's a deal working.
Yeah.
I think that would be the deal.
Would they go that
Not
far?
now. I don't think they would produce it. They would accept it now, but nor have we put it on the table, nor should we. I think the negotiations would take some more time to get there. I mean, in a negotiation, you don't just run 100 yards or throw a 100-yard pass play. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and I think we're back on the 10-yard line. So it's going to be quite a while. They would not accept it now, but if they're facing sanctions that are increasingly crippling their country, and by the way, most people in Iran are not happy with their regime, and they know it. So if they face increasingly crippling sanctions, if they face a world that is united and that they can't play us off against the Russians or the Chinese, etc., and if they see no end in sight, and there's enough on the table, I think they could be convinced to take it. I think the one helpful thing is that they have said publicly that they don't want a nuclear weapons program. I mean, it's a complete lie, but at least they've said that publicly, and so they don't have to walk back a public statement about wanting a nuclear arsenal. So it's a really tough negotiation, but I just worry that it's been done. I mean, the Bush administration, I worked with the Bush administration, but they didn't even engage in it, which I think was even worse. The Obama administration is engaged very gingerly with these sort of 3-and-out negotiations, which don't get anywhere. I think we've really got to step up the pace and probably use, go through some, secret channels and things like that. And maybe those are going on, but I haven't seen any sign of it.
We have a question up front, and then we'll have time for one more question. So, yes.
Who does the best quality, most in-depth foreign reporting on these sorts of things you've been talking about? Where we can read and trust what's being
Oh, I see, yeah. Who does the best foreign reporting and that we can really trust? Now, facetious answer would be nobody. That is, that you have to kind of be patient and develop some sources. I think some of the columnists one sees in the Washington Post and New York Times are pretty good. I think if you got the Foreign Affairs Quarterly, I hate to say that in front of the World Affairs Council committee people, but I think that's a pretty good thing. That's online. I love The Economist, but the one thing I worry about is it's so compelling. But then whenever I open something about something that I happen to know something about very much in depth, and I read it and I go, wait a minute, that's not what's happening there. But I believe the other 95% of what I read. So I worry about that. But on the other hand, I think The Economist is light years ahead of most American publications. There are some by some of these columnists. Obviously Tom Friedman knows an awful lot. I like David. I'm sorry. Oh, Brooks. Well, Brooks is great, but he doesn't write about foreign policy too often. I was thinking of more people like David Ignatius. Those are New York Times, Washington Post guys. But I would, Foreign Affairs Quarterly is a pretty serious publication, and you get some real top experts. My problem is I never have time to read all the articles. So I think it's a problem, but it's a problem mainly because you have to kind of set it up for yourself through the internet and find various people that are good and I think there's already too much designer news going on in the U.S. I don't like the fact that people choose their news sources on the basis of their own predetermined views, and I think it's part of the polarization going on in our country. One of my culprits in this U.S. polarization is internet shopping. When you see like Amazon and you buy some book that's got a left-wing perspective or a right-wing perspective, and then you buy it, you get the shopping cart and buy it, and then the next thing you know, they give 5 more books with the exact same perspective and say, if you like that, you'll like these. And so they're kind of further, typecasting you. And what they ought to say, if you're going to read that dumb book, try these, because this will give you a more balanced view on it. But they never do.
We have our final question back here.
One other thing.
Yeah.
Projectsyndicate.org. Just Google it, Project Syndicate. And you'll find people like me on the. No, I'm kidding. There are some really. It's not so good from a U.S. perspective, but it has some really good European, like former, prime ministers and stuff like that, and a lot of really good economists. So you get a sense of, what is this great crisis? Are the Europeans going to sort this out or not? The answer is they'll muddle through, and yes, they'll sort it out because the current generation of leaders in Europe don't want to be responsible for torpedoing a 50-year, 60-year project. And finally, wait till next summer when my book comes out.
We had a question in back. We've got one more there. Can we do 2 more questions?
A few years ago, I ran a race in the beautiful village of Little Compton, and then I chased it with a cone of delicious strawberry ice cream from your Gray's ice cream there.
You went up to Grace?
Absolutely. So
All right.
I remember it well.
That's up to, you actually went into Tiverton to get the good ice cream. It's Tiverton Four Corners.
Exactly.
Not to be confused with the Four Corners near here,
Right.
but it is the only street light in Tiverton or Little Compton.
Oh, it is.
That's it.
Still.
Question.
Regarding the news media, the business media in particular, there's been discussions about decelerating Chinese economic conditions.
Yeah.
But also as if the competitive advantage that China has in cheap labor wasn't enough. We also hear in the business media that the government assists their companies, which makes the playing field even more uneven.
Playing field vis-a-vis us.
We wonder if it's true,
Yeah.
and if so, what are the tools, the diplomatic tools, to try and reverse that?
Yeah, it's just persistence. It's going after them in the World Trade Organization. People always say, you're looking at one issue. It's like swatting one fly, and you got 20 flies, in your living room. Why are you going after that one fly? It does it does have a broader effect when you win these WTO cases. So it is worth doing. I have found that some of these sort of shoot yourself in the foot type things, where we say, okay, we're gonna ban Chinese products across it. It sounds great. It sounds satisfying. It doesn't work. It never has worked. I think I was in Korea in the 1980s. I was in the economic commercial section in Seoul, and I must say we were pushing high quality beef, wine, and cigarettes. Those were sort of our main items. But what eventually happened, the big problem in Korea was intellectual property rights protection, IPO, and IPR. And so what finally solved it, frankly speaking, was the Koreans started developing their own brands. And lo and behold, Samsung didn't like to be ripped off by some Malaysian producer. And so before you knew it, the Koreans become big IPR advocates. And so much so that when I worked on Korea again in 2004, we were ripe for a free trade agreement, which I got to tell you, it was negotiated during the Bush administration, but supported by the Obama administration and signed. And it really is fair. It really is fair. And if you had looked back to the 1980s, you would have never believed that you could do that with the Koreans. Never. So I think in China, you just have to keep banging on them on this. And believe me, we got this great ambassador there, this guy named Gary Locke, who was a former governor in Washington State, which, by the way, is the only state in the country that runs a surplus with the Chinese, but because they have Boeing and Apple products coming out there, or Microsoft, rather. And so, you just have to keep working on them and just make the Chinese go, oh God, I don't want to deal with this again. I got to give in. But as for those internal problems of, they have a financial sector that's just not worthy of the name, and they're going to pay for that big time. Countries that have forestalled financial sector reform have found that they suffer slower growth. And I think a lot of what you're seeing is kind of how brittle some of the system is there. Things can look pretty smooth in fast growth, but when you're starting to get priced out of the market, it's not true that the renminbi hasn't appreciated. It's appreciated a lot, and they're getting themselves priced out of the market vis-a-vis other continents, but especially Southeast Asia. And so they are, they're going to be well into single growth. And then the kind of political deal that the government has done, which is we'll give you double-digit growth and you just stay quiet, that deal goes down. So I think China has a lot of internal problems they're looking at right now.
Thank you.
We had one last question right there.
I just got back from Israel maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
And I came in with I'd like you to comment on
Yeah.
the state.
What's the question?
I'd like you to comment on the state.
Comment on the following statement about you were just in Israel a month
And
ago.
I came away with a country looking like they're preparing for war.
Yeah,
People believe they're preparing for war.
yeah,
That the don't expect the United States to come to their aid,
yeah.
and that they're scared to death that they might use these for nuclear weapons because then they would have to be surrounded by nuclear weapons. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, the question is, gentlemen heard people say in Israel that it's a country preparing for war. They don't think the U.S. will protect them. They don't think the U.S. will come to their rescue. They're getting ready for war, and they're looking to the possibility they'll have to use their nuclear arsenal. I think I don't see Israel ever using their nuclear arsenal unless they're attacked by nuclear weapons. I just don't see that happening. That's certainly their declaratory policy. I think that's just a fact. They would never use that nuclear arsenal unless they were attacked by nuclear weapons. So that's on the nuclear issue. I just don't see that as anything anyone is planning to do. Secondly, with respect to preparing for war, I think there is, when you have a prime minister talking about this every day, and by the way, I mean, I'm not sure I like the way he often talks about things, but this is not a non-issue either. I mean, this isn't some invented issue. It's a real issue. And so I think there is a great concern that the country may be getting into some kind of Scud war, with missile war with the Iranians. And so I think there is a kind of view that the situation is kind of precarious and dangerous. Julie and I are going to the Negev in end of November. Don't worry, Julie, it'll be okay when we get there. And the Negev is pretty big, so. But I think I really don't think the Iranian problem can be solved by the Israeli military. I really don't. I don't think airstrikes are going to solve a problem that is in the making. Iran does not have a missile, does not have a warhead now. So the idea that we're going to launch an attack at this point, I just don't see it. I remember with President Bush in Sydney when we got word that the Israelis had attacked the unfinished nuclear facility in Syria. But I would not confuse the Syrians with the Iranians. And I would not assume, and nor was that, that nuclear facility was not hardened, it was not underground. It was basically a shell, and they took it out and fairly easily, and the Syrians were so embarrassed they didn't say anything. I don't think that's the kind of situation in Iran. It's deep underground. You need some very special ordnance for that. And what I just get impatient with in the U.S. is somehow this notion that the Israelis can do our dirty work for us. And I think for Israel to do that would be very, very dangerous for Israel's future. And which is the reason we would have to jump in. And I don't like the U.S. having to jump in because someone else makes a decision to do something. And so I think we need to really make that clear with the Israelis. Again, I think we've got a ways to go on the diplomatic string, and I think we ought to keep working there, maybe even step up.